The vast chamber, the Galactic High Command buzzed with the murmurs of alien dignitaries, their voices layered with arrogance and certainty. The air was thick with the scent of ionized metals and exotic pheromones from a numerous species gathered, each representing a different empire, each believing in the supreme power of the galactic dominion. At the center of the grand hall, bathed in the cold blue glow of the overhead lights, stood Xeric of the Xanthorian War Order. He was a towering warrior, his battle-scarred exosuit still carrying the scars of wars fought across 1,000 worlds. His four crimson eyes, hardened by experience, scanned the faces of the gathered leaders, searching for any sign of reason, but he found none. The Supreme Chancellor, VYR Talk the Undying, lounged upon his levitating throne, a magnificent construct of dark metal and pulsating energy. His elongated, reptilian face twisted into a smirk as he regarded Xeric with amusement. "You stand before us, a warrior of great renown, and yet you tremble like a hatchling," VYR Talk mused, his voice carrying across the chamber. "Explain yourself." Xeric exhaled, the air from his twin lungs releasing a subtle hum. He had seen what the Dominion's arrogance had done to countless civilizations before, but humanity was different. "The humans," Xeric began, his deep voice resonating through the hall, "are not like the other species we have conquered." A ripple of laughter echoed through the chamber. Warlords, strategists, and aristocrats of the Dominion shook their heads, some even scoffing openly. "Not this nonsense again," sneered Lord Scythen of the Crex Dominion, his jagged exoskeleton gleaming under the chamber's lights. "We have crushed empires greater than theirs. What could these primitive creatures possibly do?" Xeric's mandibles twitched in irritation, but he kept his voice steady. "You misunderstand. It is not their technology nor their armies that should concern you." VYR Talk leaned forward, resting his clawed hand against his throne. "Then what?" Xeric's gaze hardened. "They're women." A moment of silence. Then, uproarious laughter filled the chamber. Some aliens slammed their fists against their tables, amused by what they assumed was a joke. Others whispered to one another, shaking their heads in disbelief. VYR Talk sighed, rubbing his ridged brow. "You waste our time, Xeric." Xeric took a step forward, his heavy armored boots echoing in the chamber. "I fought against the humans once before. I saw their weakness. But I also saw something I have never witnessed in all my years of war. Something we cannot afford to provoke." The laughter faded slightly as some of the more experienced warlords listened carefully. Xeric continued. "During my campaign on Earth, we followed standard Dominion doctrine. We struck swiftly, annihilating their military infrastructure. Their men fought bravely, but they fell as expected. Their cities burned, and we believed the war was won." He paused, his voice growing darker. "Then we made the mistake of targeting their women." VYR Talk tilted his head, intrigued despite himself. "Go on." Xeric's mandibles twitched in remembered fear. "It was a logical strategy, one we've used countless times. Eliminate their women and their species withers. Their morale collapses. We sent strike teams into cities, targeting civilian centers. We believed the human men would break." He shook his head. "But they didn't." Silence filled the chamber now. Even the most skeptical of warlords listened intently. When their women were slaughtered, something inside them changed. Xeric said, his voice low, "Their soldiers fought harder. Their leaders, once diplomatic, became ruthless. Men who had never held a weapon before picked them up without hesitation. They did not fight for survival. They fought for vengeance." He looked around the chamber, his crimson eyes locking onto each leader in turn. "I saw scholars, engineers, and laborers become warriors overnight. Their pain turned to fury, their grief to bloodlust. They did not surrender. They did not retreat. They did not stop." A younger strategist scoffed. "So they fought back harder? That is to be expected. That does not make them a threat." Xeric's exosuit whirred as he clenched his fists. "You do not understand. This was beyond desperation, beyond defiance. It was something else entirely. I watched a single man, his wife and children slaughtered before his eyes, charge an entire squad of Xanthorian warriors. He had no armor, no weapons, yet he tore through them with his bare hands." Murmurs spread across the chamber. Some warlords exchanged uneasy glances. Zurich pressed on. Human men do not break when you take their women. They transform. Their weaknesses dissolve, replaced by something primal. They do not fight for themselves, nor for victory. They fight to destroy. VYR Talk was silent for a long moment. Then he exhaled, shaking his head. A fascinating tale, warrior, but ultimately irrelevant. Zurich's expression darkened. You still do not understand. You believe Earth will fall like all the others. You believe their species will shatter. But if you target their women, he stepped forward, his voice like thunder. You will not conquer Earth. You will awaken hell. VYR Talk's smirk returned, his arrogance undiminished. You presume much, Zurich, but your cowardice is noted. He gestured lazily. The invasion proceeds as planned. Humanity will kneel before the Dominion. Zurich sighed. He had tried. He had given them the warning they needed. But like all arrogant rulers before them, they refused to listen. His voice was heavy as he spoke his final words. Then you are all fools. The chamber erupted in outrage, warlords slamming their fists in protest at his insolence. But VYR Talk simply chuckled. The war begins, Zurich. Let us see if your nightmares hold any truth. Zurich turned, his cape of war medals fluttering behind him as he strode from the chamber. He knew what was coming. The Dominion had just signed its own death warrant. The invasion of Earth began with the precision of a well-practiced war doctrine. The Zenthorian Armada, a fleet of moon-sized warships, descended to the planet's atmosphere, blotting out the sky in great metallic shadows. Their planetary bombardment was merciless, targeting key military installations, communication hubs, and power grids. The once bustling metropolises of Earth were reduced to smoldering ruins within hours. From orbit, Supreme Chancellor Vuartok observed the chaos with satisfaction. His war council stood behind him in the bridge of Dominion, a vast command center aboard the Imperium-class dreadnought, the Endless Conquest. Resistance is minimal, reported General Cathal, a reptilian strategist with cybernetic implants gleaming under the war room's dim lights. As expected, their conventional forces crumble before us. VYR Talk smirked. Earth falls as all world before have. Humanity will kneel. Below, the streets of New York, Moscow, and Karachi ran with blood. Zenthorian warriors, 8 foot tall, armored monstrosities, marched through the ruins, executing any humans who resisted. Their plasma rifles burned through flesh and stone alike. Civilians fled in terror. Those who surrendered were forced into containment facilities, their fate left to the whims of the Empire's warlords. Then the extermination squads were deployed. This was the Dominion's preferred method of war, destroying not just armies but the very fabric of a species. Their strategy was simple. Target the women first, crush the hope of reproduction, break the spirit of the men, and ensure that no generation rises to reclaim their home. Strike teams landed in hospitals, shelters, and homes, executing women and children with brutal efficiency. Mothers were torn from their families, their screams echoing through the ruins. It was supposed to be the final blow. It was supposed to shatter humanity. Then everything changed. The first reports came from New York. A Zenthorian patrol squad, 20 of the Empire's best warriors, and a civilian outpost, executing all the women and children within. The few surviving men had been unarmed, helpless. The squad left them alive, as per war doctrine. Broken men were no threat. But hours later, something unnatural happened. Survivor reports told of a massacre, but not of humans. The Zenthorian patrol had been found slaughtered, gutted, torn apart, their bodies left in horrific displays of violence. No plasma weapons, reported a Dominion scout, his voice shaky over the transmission. The wounds, they were made with blunt force. Teeth, hands. VYR Talk dismissed it as an anomaly, perhaps a predator of the planet, or deserters among our own. But then, the same reports came from Moscow, Beijing, and Karachi. In every location where Zenthorian forces had massacred the women, a terrible phenomenon followed. Men, who had previously cowered, who had surrendered without resistance, were now charging into battle with no regard for their own survival. A single father, previously an office worker, was seen killing 5 Xanthorians with a sledgehammer before being vaporized. An elderly man who had lost his wife in the invasion set himself on fire and ran into a Xanthorian outpost, detonating a homemade bomb that wiped out an entire platoon. In Pakistan, an engineer whose family had been slaughtered in front of him, a man who had never fired a weapon before, somehow managed to hijack an enemy gunship, crashing directly into the Empire's main command post in the region. The reports became more frequent, more disturbing. Xanthorian soldiers, bred for war and superior in every way, were now the ones retreating. The change. The biological and psychological analysts aboard Endless Conquest reviewed the battlefield data. Something was happening to the human males. They weren't just fighting back. They were mutating. The destruction of their women had awakened something deep inside them, a primal force that defied logic. They no longer felt fear. They no longer valued their own lives. Captured Dominion soldiers, interrogated under extreme duress, describe horrifying encounters. "They don't stop," one wounded Xanthorian soldier gasped, his body trembling despite his species' lack of emotion. "I shot one of them. His arm was blown off, but he kept coming. He tackled me. He didn't scream. He didn't hesitate. He just tore into my throat with his teeth." Another Xanthorian officer, missing half his face, wept as he recounted his horror. "They fight with their bare hands, with their teeth, with fire. They don't retreat. They don't break. We made a mistake. We made a mistake." HFY Talk watched the reports in silence. His smirk was gone. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "This is not the behavior of a broken species." Zurich, who had been standing at the back of the command chamber, finally stepped forward. He looked at the War Council, the same council that had mocked him days ago. And then, with a voice heavy with the weight of inevitability, he spoke. "I warned you." A deep silence fell over the room. HFY Talk's claws dug into his throne. "This does not change the outcome. We are still superior." Zurich shook his head. "You don't understand. You haven't seen what I have." He turned, activating a holographic recording from one of the battlefield drones. The warlords and generals watched in stunned silence. The footage showed a human male, shirtless, bloodied, eyes hollow with grief, tearing through an entire squad of Xanthorian warriors. He had no weapons. He used his fists, his teeth, his rage. One by one, the elite warriors fell, their armor cracked open, their bodies crushed under the sheer force of vengeance. The human never spoke a word. He simply destroyed. HFY Talk turned away from the footage. For the first time in his long reign, his confidence faltered. "This is not possible." Zurich locked eyes with him. "This is what happens when you take away what human men love." The Dominion had seen war before, but they had never seen this, and they were not prepared. The first defeat. That night, the first Xanthorian stronghold fell, not to an army, not to a rebellion, but to a horde of men who had lost everything and now had nothing left to fear. In the darkness, the High Command received a single intercepted transmission from Earth, a human voice, ragged, unrelenting. "You killed our women. Now we will kill you all." HFY Talk stared into the abyss of the war map. The Dominion's greatest mistake had been made. The shattered remains of Earth bore witness to a transformation unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. In the wake of the relentless onslaught, something extraordinary emerged from the ruins. A raw, untamed eruption of human fury. This was not a mere organized resistance. It was an outpouring of grief and vengeance, a spontaneous awakening of a people pushed to the edge. The calculated cruelty of the invaders, who had sought to break humanity by targeting its women, instead ignited a force that no war machine could contain. In the debris-strewn streets of New York, where skyscrapers now stood as skeletal monuments to a once thriving civilization, a small band of survivors gathered under cloak of darkness. Among them was Thomas, a former schoolteacher whose gentle demeanor had been shattered by the horrific loss of his wife and daughter. With a rusty pipe clutched tightly in his trembling hand, Thomas led his comrades through the wreckage. Every step they took was driven by a singular purpose, to avenge the fallen and to ensure that the memory of their loved ones would fuel their every action. Across the Atlantic, in the bombed-out heart of London, another transformation was underway. John, a humble factory worker whose life had been upended by the ruthless execution of his beloved, had risen to lead an impromptu militia. In a city where sirens and distant explosions were now the norm, John rallied his neighbors. With makeshift weapons fashioned from scrap metal and broken glass, the people of London began to reclaim their streets. Their grief had fused with newfound resolve, turning everyday citizens into warriors who fought with both desperation and determination. The flames of retribution spread swiftly. In Mumbai, amid the chaos of a city that had known both opulence and abject poverty, local men emerged as guardians of their shattered communities. In narrow lanes and crowded marketplaces, they organized themselves into impromptu units, their faces streaked with soot and tears. Every shattered storefront and abandoned alleyway became a battlefield where the invaders' advanced technology met the raw, unbridled power of human will. These were not soldiers trained for war. They were ordinary men and boys who had been forced into extraordinary circumstances by a cruelty that could not be forgotten. Yet the metamorphosis was deeper than the physical acts of rebellion. It was a psychological and spiritual reawakening, a reclaiming of identity and dignity that had long lain dormant under the weight of oppression. In Tokyo, Hiro, a mild-mannered office clerk, found that the emptiness left by the loss of his partner transformed into a strategic clarity. Unable to mourn in the traditional ways in a city under siege, Hiro began to orchestrate guerrilla operations from hidden safe houses in the labyrinthine backstreets. His careful planning and intimate knowledge of the urban terrain allowed him to strike swiftly at enemy patrols. Each ambush, every hit-and-run attack, was a defiant declaration that human spirit could not be so easily crushed. In the remote highlands of South America, the story took on an even grimmer tone. Rural villagers, whose lives had revolved around the slow, steady rhythm of the land, suddenly found themselves thrust into a conflict they never imagined. Farmers and laborers, with their simple tools and raw physical strength, became an unstoppable force. Their weapons were crude, axes, machetes, even sharpened rocks, but each blow struck was imbued with the anguish of lost kin and shattered dreams. These communities, once isolated and peaceful, united in a common cause. Their resistance was as much about preserving the memory of those they had lost as it was about repelling the alien conquerors. The invaders, bred for calculated warfare and bolstered by advanced technology, found themselves increasingly confounded. Their elite forces, designed to dominate through sheer power and precision, were now confronting an enemy that fought with reckless abandon and relentless ferocity. The Xanthorian warriors, who had once moved through battle with the confidence of invincibility, began to falter when faced with men whose rage defied logic. In every clash, the human fighters seemed to draw strength from their grief, turning each encounter into a brutal melee of fists, makeshift weapons, and raw determination. One particularly harrowing confrontation unfolded on the outskirts of Moscow. Under the pallid light of a winter moon, an elite squad of invaders was ambushed by a ragtag group of human insurgents. The battle was chaotic and unrestrained, no strategic formation, only the savage impulse to inflict retribution. Witnesses later described scenes of utter anarchy. Human fighters, some barely more than boys, charging with nothing but the memory of their losses, fueling their every movement. Their unyielding assault left the technologically superior invaders scrambling to regroup, their armor dented and spirits broken by the sheer force of human will. Amid the chaos, the transformation within humanity was palpable. Men who had once been relegated to roles of quiet support or hesitant participation in national defense now emerged as icons of resistance. Their courage was not born of military training, but a profound, personal loss, a loss that demanded retribution. In whispered conversations in hidden basements and crowded underground networks, the legend of the wrath of humanity began to take shape. This was no organized military campaign. It was a spontaneous outburst of collective sorrow, channeled into a powerful movement that refused to be silenced. Reports from various corners of the globe confirmed that the invaders were in deep disarray. Commanders within the Dominion's ranks issued orders with trembling voices as they struggled to comprehend the ferocity of the human counterattacks. Every successful ambush, every small victory, eroded the invaders' confidence. turning what was meant to be a swift, merciless conquest into a protracted and bloody quagmire. The once proud warriors of the Galactic Empire found themselves besieged on all fronts by an enemy that drew strength from their own despair. Yet even as humanity's wrath surged, there was an undercurrent of sorrow and sacrifice. Each battle fought, each life lost in the struggle, was a stark reminder of the heavy price of vengeance. The survivors carried deep scars, physical, emotional, and spiritual, that would take generations to heal. In the midst of the relentless fighting, many questioned whether the cycle of bloodshed would ever cease. But for those who had lost everything, the answer was clear. There could be no peace until justice was meted out to the tyrants who had shattered their world. Thus, the wrath of humanity became a force unlike any other, a tidal wave of retribution that crashed relentlessly against the might of the invaders. In every ruined city, on every blood-soaked battlefield, the echoes of a single, unifying promise resounded. Those who had wronged them would one day pay. The invaders, for all their technological prowess and strategic superiority, had underestimated the indomitable spirit of a people united by grief and bound by the need for justice. And as the fires of rebellion spread ever brighter across Earth's ravaged landscapes, it became undeniable that the true power of humanity lay not in its weapons or armor, but in the unbreakable resolve of its people to fight for what was sacred and irreplaceable. In the end, the wrath of humanity was more than just a reaction. It was a transformation. It was the birth of a new era, forged in the crucible of loss and hardened by the unyielding desire for retribution. And though the path ahead was fraught with pain and uncertainty, one truth remained. The invaders had awakened a sleeping giant, one that would not rest until every injustice had been avenged. As the days turned into weeks, the relentless tide of human vengeance surged from the ashes of shattered families and broken hearts, exacting a heavy toll on the Galactic Empire. The invaders, once towering symbols of technological superiority and ruthless efficiency, found themselves scattered, demoralized, and forced to retreat. The universe watched in a hushed awe as the mighty Dominion crumbled beneath the weight of its own arrogance and the unyielding fury of Earth's people. In the ruins of a once glorious metropolis, now reduced to rubble and smoldering embers, Zurich, the alien war veteran whose dire warning had been so easily dismissed, stood silently among a small band of survivors. His 4 crimson eyes, which had witnessed countless wars across 1,000 worlds, now reflected not only the flickering flames of a burning city, but also the grim determination of a people reborn in wrath. Here, amid shattered concrete and twisted metal, the final chapters of the Dominion's conquest were being written. Across the globe, human insurgents turned the tide of battle through a series of desperate, yet brilliantly orchestrated skirmishes. In the scarred streets of Moscow, where the biting cold of winter mingled with the heat of exploding ordnance, a coalition of guerrilla fighters had encircled a Dominion command outpost. The building, once a proud symbol of imperial might, was pummeled into oblivion by improvised explosives, rocket-propelled grenades, and incendiary devices. With every explosive impact, the invaders' ranks diminished and human fighters, driven by an unquenchable thirst for retribution, pressed their advantage. News of these hard-won victories rippled through the ranks of the Galactic High Command. Dominion officers, whose earlier confidence had been built on years of conquest across countless worlds, now pleaded for reinforcements while urging strategic retreats. In the cold, metallic war rooms aboard dreadnoughts like the Endless Conquest, heated debates replaced the once unquestioned orders. The invaders' leaders were forced to confront a bitter reality. The human spirit, when fueled by unimaginable loss, was an unstoppable force that defied all calculations. Deep within the Empire's central fleet, isolated from the chaos on Earth's surface, Supreme Chancellor Vyartok convened an emergency council. His reptilian visage, etched with lines of authority and cruelty, now betrayed a flicker of anxiety. "Our forces are being decimated," reported an officer, his voice trembling as he pointed to holographic displays of chaotic battlefields. "The insurgency is unlike anything we have encountered." For the first time, Vyartok was forced to admit a hard truth. The warning he had so arrogantly ignored, Zurich's caution against targeting Earth's women, had been a prelude to their own undoing. "We dismiss a simple truth out of pride," he muttered bitterly, watching as his once proud armadas were reduced to disorganized clusters of retreating soldiers. On the surface, The human resistance was evolving rapidly from a collection of desperate survivors into an organized force of retribution. In the ruins of New York, battered yet unbowed, small pockets of fighters emerged in the shadows to reclaim their city. Their weapons were makeshift, salvaged metal, repurposed technology, and the raw force of human determination, but they struck with precision born of intimate knowledge of their home terrain. Every ambush, every hit-and-run attack against a Dominion patrol served as both a tactical victory and a symbolic repudiation of the invaders' inhumane strategy. In a final, climactic battle on the outskirts of an urban wasteland near what had once been a thriving city center, hundreds of human insurgents assembled at dawn. Bathed in a pale, resolute light, they surged forward against a column of retreating Dominion soldiers. The air was rent by the roar of explosions and the clamor of clashing metal, a chaotic symphony of vengeance. Amid the chaos, heroic acts unfolded, a man dragging his injured comrade through a hail of plasma fire. Groups of women, no longer relegated to the background, fighting shoulder to shoulder with men, and individuals, each driven by personal loss, sacrificing themselves to tip the scales of war. Each fallen invader was a step closer to ensuring that Earth would never again be subjugated by tyranny. Zurich watched these scenes with a heavy heart. He had witnessed the rise and fall of countless empires, but never before had he seen such a raw, transformative power unleashed by grief. Here was a people who had lost everything: families, homes, dignity, and who had transmuted that anguish into a weapon more potent than any plasma rifle or dreadnought. In that moment, the old order of the Galactic Empire, built on conquest and cruelty, seemed irretrievably broken. The invaders' technological prowess and strategic doctrines, once their greatest assets, now offered no refuge in the unyielding wrath of a united humanity. As the final Dominion outpost fell silent, the last desperate attempts at negotiation crumbled. A scattering of high-ranking Dominion officers, with voices quavering between disbelief and despair, attempted to contact the human resistance to broker a ceasefire. But the message that echoed back was not one of reconciliation. It was the unmistakable roar of vengeance. The last transmission, rebroadcast on every available frequency, declared, "You took our women, you shattered our families, and now you will answer for your crimes." With that, the remnants of the Galactic Empires will fight dissolved into the darkness of space. In the aftermath of the final battle, as dawn broke over a ravaged Earth, the once mighty symbols of the Dominion lay in ruins. The grand halls of the Galactic High Command, where decisions had once been made with cold indifference, now stood empty, haunted by the echoes of hubris and unheeded warnings. Zurich, the solitary bearer of grim foresight, now understood the full measure of what had transpired. His warning had been simple yet profound. To spare Earth's women was to preserve the very essence of humanity, a spark that, once ignited by loss, could never be extinguished. In the quiet that followed, as survivors began the arduous process of rebuilding their shattered lives, a new legacy was forged from the crucible of war. The narrative of the fall of the Galactic Empire would be passed down through generations, a solemn reminder of the price of arrogance and the indomitable power of a people united by grief and resolve. Amid the scars and ruins, there blossomed a cautious hope that from the ashes of tyranny, a just and compassionate society could emerge, a society that would honor the sacrifices of the past and ensure that the horrors of conquest would never again be repeated. The story of Earth's uprising became a legend across the stars, a tale of retribution that resonated in the corridors of power far beyond its shattered borders. And as the stars bore silent witness to the collapse of an empire, the memory of a single, unheeded warning echoed across the cosmos: "Do not kill Earth's women, for in doing so, you awaken a fury that no force in the galaxy can ever hope to contain." Thus, as the Galactic Empire faded into the annals of history, a stark monument to the perils of unchecked ambition, Earth and its people looked toward a future of cautious rebirth. Determined to learn from the past and to nurture the bonds of family and community that had been the invaders' fatal flaw, humanity resolved to build a world defined not by conquest, but by compassion, resilience, and an unbreakable spirit that had weathered even the darkest of storms.